All right. So, short reviews for February 2nd. We're looking at the first 2 weeks of February. And yeah, a lot of dark folk, folk metal, black metal, a little bit of death metal, and some hardcore kind of stuff. Narrative is a German black metal band, and Servants of Prophets, Martyrs of Men is their debut full length. And it's a pretty solid album with a really strong guitar presence, great drummer, and they have a really good grasp of the, uh, I would say, mid 90s black metal sound with the keyboards are dialed down for the most part. So, solid album. Moderately high recommendation for that one. And yeah, check out a quick clip of one of the songs. Okay, I have a lot more to say about All Out War and their latest album, Celestial Rot. I think this is a pretty classic band that illustrates how metallic hardcore came from crossover and led into metalcore, and what metalcore was for in the 90s, which was, it wasn't all, Snapcase necessarily. Uh, so All Out War, it's a New York-based band who have more in common with like a Ringworm or an Earth Crisis, where there's a pronounced influence from Slayer in a lot of their early work, and that helped push them through towards more extreme metal influenced music later on. So, I you know a good parody with their trajectory is probably Earth Crisis, even because even they kept up with some of the more modern influences. They moved on and didn't necessarily go fully towards like dark hardcore or whatever. This record really pushes along at a really strong clip, and it's confrontational, it's extreme, and it almost feels almost like grind at sometimes. And they touch into a death metal even. So uh, I'm a longtime fan of some of their early stuff because that was kind of when I was in high school, and it was the thing off to the side that a lot of people weren't paying attention to that I thought was cool. So uh, yeah, I'll listen to a quick clip of that. All right, Carnosis uh, are on their second full length album now. It's a Sweden based tech, technical melodic death metal band who they kind of show up for this album a lot more. The production is loud and clean and modern. There's a lot of the precision that you'd want to find as like if you're a fan of like Revocation, Bloodshot Dawn, Black Dahlia Murder, you're going to get the general verve of this record and why it's really well spoken, really well played, and well produced. It's a good mix of what you would want from a modern melodic uh, death metal record that has a little bit of death thrash intensity, a little bit of some brutal death touches in there too. Just little hits that keep things interesting, and it just kind of flings along and goes for it in a way that is much improved over their previous recordings. So, you know, take a quick listen and you'll get like it's just kind of a nonstop record. Sermon is a Turkish gothic death doom metal band, and unfortunately, this record is it just I don't it just sounds terrible. Either that's the loudness wars effect or it's just tweaked in a way that it's just kind of unlistenable. But it's the kind of record where I have to turn it down to half volume to get any of the nuance out of it, and that's unfortunate because Gothic Death Doom really relies on nuance. And the big thing about this record is it's sort of a slightly more death metal tuned take on what I would consider Draconian Times era Paradise Lost, which is sentimental, gothic, and a little bit in tune with the alternative metal of the time, mid 90s. And still has that, again, the early Paradise Lost feeling just past the first album. I'm a huge fan of Gothic, the album from Paradise Lost, so there's a lot of things that I like on here that refer to that, and we'll cut into one of those. The one song I think kind of nailed it, even though I don't think the production values make this something that will last in a lot of people's uh, collections. Holy Water is a that's a project from Jasper Den Hartig. I think he's a Danish musician. I forget who plays in the post punk band Heat Dust and is known for that. Now, Holy Water is something closer to Erebrat, for my just because there is a little bit of a devotional feeling to its uh, shoegaze and post metal influence sound. There is a deadpan dark wave or gothic rock, if you will, feeling to the vocals, which gives the whole thing a drunken, slurring kind of feeling overall that emphasizes those kind of metal gaze, if you will, influences. So it's not the heaviest record. It's not. It's a little. It gets a little bit lost in its cups in the end. It's a little bit too long, but it is a cool thing to pick up and sort of marvel over for a short period of time. The first six songs or so are it's where the vibe arrives. It's kind of where the tuneful sort of heart of the record shows, and then the last few songs, the last three or four, are less interesting to me. So it didn't really last with me, but I liked the initial induction into it. Right. Fredlos or Fredlus or however you would pronounce that in Swedish is a new folk metal dark folk sort of group from I guess folks. The one person you'd probably know from the band is Alex Hellid from Entombed, but it's not really a death metal album at all. There's some guest spots from a fellow from Manigarm, if that counts for you, and otherwise it's a somber, sort of epic feeling Swedish folk metal record, and one that doesn't really get lost in a lot of folk instrumentation so much as it does in the moment, in the narrative, and the story that they're telling, which seems to tell the story of the area that they're from the point of view of the common man, and a lot of the social issues that that area has overcome. Um, I'm not a Swedish history buff, but there were some pretty interesting things to read about the Nortale area, which was pretty interesting. Like the town being burned down by Russians at some point. So, um, otherwise, expect a little bit of the over the top, more expressive vocalizations of Solstafir, or the more shouted register and some of the backing vocals, and a little bit of the slower, more ballad style of songs from Fed. And if you know Lumpsk, and when you probably should know Lumpsk if you like folk metal, especially Swedish folk metal, you'll appreciate the sound instantly because it is a bit similar to Lumpsk. So, uh, you know, I'll play a clip and you can decide if that's your thing. Iterum Nata is a solo project from Jesse Heikkinen, who played on the last three Hexvessel records as a guitarist, and he's played in some other bands, I think King Satan and some others. And this is more of an introspective progressive psychedelic folk band, group project which has put out the last record, The Course of Empire, seemed to be leaning more towards his own take on neofolk. Not exactly, but it was more of a stripped down experience, and this is a little bit more bring in all the bells and whistles, a little bit more of the psychedelia, and it makes for something that's a little bit more involved, a little bit more immersive, and more obviously introspective. And I connected with it right away. I think it's a pretty fine release. It's very well produced for a self-produced record, and I don't think the whole sequence, the whole track list works for me, but everything up to about losing connection is pretty solid, and I enjoyed what he had to say and how he said it. So pretty solid record that I would recommend, and I'll play a clip so you can see if that's anywhere near what you'd be interested in. From the mountain of creation, we watch the burning world, a veil of diamonds upon the soil. Returning is an Olympia, Washington-based atmospheric black metal band who incorporate dark ambience and performance art and theater into their work. And well, of course, on record you get more of the black metal side of things, and that consists of three about 13 to 16 minute songs that are excellent in their composition and rhythm guitar interest. I think there's a bit of the Cascadian affect you might expect taking a look at their themes and all that, but there's also some interesting bits of electronic and just smaller dark ambient additions that you pick up on more with each listen. So very immersive, very spiritual music, which has a lot to say without saying throwing a bunch of words at you. So I really connected most with the final song, Bright Power, Dark Peace, and we'll have a short clip of that so you can check and see if you're into it. Terrestrial Hospice is a black metal duo from Poland, which has a pretty prominent member of Thunderbolt and the drummer from Behemoth, who is in quite a few projects and great at everything he does here. In this record, now the first record from this band was mostly raw, aggressive, confrontational black metal, and this record takes a chance to pull back towards the more mid-paced side of the band. And mid-paced is pretty relative when you're talking about black metal, but they find some grooves, they find a little bit more melody to play around with, and to sort of dig into what I consider one of those you know a listening experience where they tunnel in and there's really no way back, you just have to keep going. So the best part of this record, and what I point out here, is Extinction Delight is just a good song in general, and it's a good representation of the album. But I love the way it passes into Vermin, which is another one of the better songs on here. But with that in mind, the sort of moment that I like the best on the record is Memoir, and we can listen to that clip so you see what I mean about kind of the energy and the violence of the band, which is pretty easy to pick up on. All right, Osia's Kronos. This is an EP from the band in between records, and they're following up probably one of their more popular records at this point. This is a technical deathcore band out of England, and this it's tough for me to review or really criticize deathcore because it's all kind of the same, at the same standard and the same loudness. There's not a lot of personality that a lot of these bands afford themselves because of the production values they insist upon, which are fairly artificial and kind of always feature the sort of bass drop into a chugging sort of breakdown. That's fine. Um, but this band leans a little bit more towards technical death metal on their better songs, and it's pretty believable stuff. I think they pull it off, and these guys are pretty talented. So I don't think the overall style is that interesting to me, but I think there's clearly some uh, kernel of talent and idea here, which translates into a nice professional package for anyone who's interested in the more deathcore side of things. Uh, Stood out compared to a lot of the deathcore that gets sent to me, so there you go. You check out a clip of Golden Throne to see what I liked about it.